The night of 10th of May, 1941, Westminster Abbey stands silhouetted against a sky turned orange by incendiary bombs. Above the tympans, nearly 500 German bombers drone through the darkness, their Jumo engines thrumming a death rattle that Londoners know too well. By dawn, 136 civilians would be dead. The House of Commons, a smoldering ruin, and Britain's night defenses. They'd managed to shoot down precisely 33 aircraft, apathetic 7% interception rate that made Air Marshal Sholto Douglas want to punch a wall. Here's the maddening bit. The RAF had brilliant fighters. The Beaufighter packed 4 20mm cannons and 6 machine guns. Enough firepower to shred a Hankel. High 111 in seconds. Squadrons sat at readiness across southern England. Pilots strapped in, engines warm. Yet night after night, they'd roar into the blackness and find nothing. Absolutely saw all. German bomber streams crossed the channel unmolested whilst British fighters circled uselessly, burning petrol and hope in equal measure. The problem wasn't courage or equipment, it was physics. Human eyes, magnificent as they are in daylight, become nearly worthless in darkness. The rods in your retina need roughly 30 minutes to fully adapt to night conditions. And even then, you can barely spot another aircraft beyond half a mile unless it's conveniently backlit by searchlights or happens to cross in front of the moon. German bomber crews knew this intimately. They'd navigate by the glow of burning cities, drop their loads, and vanish back into the void before any night fighter could close within visual range. Ground controllers tried everything. Searchlight batteries would cone a bomber, dozens of beams converging on a single aircraft, then radio vectors to the nearest fighter. Sounds brilliant in theory. In practice, the bomber would simply dive away, whilst the fighter pilot, night vision completely ruined by the glare, would spend 10 minutes blinking away purple after images. By the time his eyes readjusted, the German crew would be halfway back to France, probably having a smoke and a laugh. The early radar sets offered hope, but they were primitive beasts in 1941. Chain home stations could detect incoming raids and provide rough headings, but they couldn't guide a fighter onto a specific target. The aerials were enormous fixed installations, useless for tracking individual aircraft with any precision. Airborne radar existed, yes, but the early AI Mk4 sets fitted to Beaufighters had an effective range of barely 3 MIO and a minimum range of 400 FT. That meant even if you got lucky enough to detect a bomber, you still had to close that final quarter mile using nothing but your eyeballs. In pitch darkness against a black aircraft traveling at 200 mph, the mathematics were brutal. A typical interception would unfold like this. Ground control vectors due to within 5 mph of a bomber stream. Your radar operator picks up a contact at 2 miles. You close to half a mile, lose radar contact because you're too close, and now you're desperately scanning the darkness for a visual. But here's the killer. The German dorsal gunner has been watching for you. The moment your silhouette appears against the marginally lighter sky, he opens fire. Tracer rounds walking towards your cockpit. You brake hard, lose your target, and the bomber escapes into the night whilst you curse every god ever invented. Spring 1941 bled into summer. The Blitz officially ended, but German bombers still prowled British skies. The RAF needed something radical. They needed someone willing to think sideways, to question assumptions everyone else took as gospel. They needed, though they didn't know it yet, a physicist with a reputation for ideas so mad they just might work. Squadron leader John Cunningham understood the paradox better than most. By late 1941, he'd become the RAF's most successful night fighter ace. 20 confirmed kills, and every single one had taught him the same cruel lesson. The conditions that let you see the enemy also let the enemy see you first. Full moon nights were the best and worst simultaneously. Under a bright moon, a bomber's silhouette might be visible at 1,000 yards, sometimes more if you caught it crossing in front of cloud formations. Cunningham could stalk a Dornier 17 close to firing range and unleash his cannons before the crew knew death had arrived. Sounds ideal, doesn't it? Except every German rear gunner in Bomber Command had received identical training. Watch the lighter sky behind and below. That's where the RAF night fighter will appear. The geometry of night combat favored the defender by a horrifying margin. Imagine you're hunting a Hankel at 15,000 FT. You're approaching from below and behind the classic fighter attack position. But the bomber sits between you and the sky, which even on the darkest night holds some residual luminance from stars, moon, or the atmospheric glow that never quite disappears. Your aircraft, meanwhile, is a black shape against the even blacker earth below. The bomber's ventral gunner, the poor sod lying in the belly position, has a clear view of anything approaching from beneath. He spots your silhouette at 800 watt. You haven't seen him yet. He opens fire at 600 wallid. You're still scanning, squinting, hoping for a glimpse of your target. By the time you spot the bomber at perhaps 400 YD, tracer rounds are already chewing through your wing. The dorsal gunner has joined the party now. Two 782 PBM MG-15 machine guns pumping out 1,000 rounds per minute between them. Your advantages, speed, maneuverability, superior firepower mean absolutely nothing if you're dead before you can employ them. Operational research buffins at Fighter Command ran the numbers through calculating machines and came back with depressing statistics. In moonlit conditions, German gunners achieved first detection in roughly 70% of encounters. The RAF pilot spotted his target first only 30% of the time, usually when attacking from ahead or from the side, positions that were nearly impossible to achieve given the limitations of ground-controlled interception. The kill-to-loss ratio reflected this. For every 5 bombers destroyed, the RAF lost 2 night fighters. Unsustainable mathematics when you're already outnumbered. Pilots tried every trick in the manual. Some approached with the moon behind them, hoping the glare would blind enemy gunners. Occasionally worked, usually didn't. German crews simply looked away from the moon, let their eyes adjust, then scanned the darker quadrants. Others attempted stern attacks from directly behind, presenting the smallest possible silhouette, but closing speed became problematic, and the approach angle gave the bombers' rear gunner an excellent field of fire. The cleverer pilots exploited cloud cover, diving out of the murk at close range. Brilliant when clouds cooperated, useless on clear nights, which Sod's law were precisely the conditions when you could actually see well enough to fight. Weather became a maddening lottery. Overcast skies grounded the German bombers, but also made RAF interceptions nearly impossible. Clear skies brought heavy raids, but turned every night fighter into a target the moment it approached firing range. Some crews started attacking from above despite every tactical manual, screaming against it. At least you might spot the bombers' upper surfaces against the dark ground below. Except now you're silhouetted against the lighter sky for every gunner in the formation, flying into the teeth of concentrated defensive fire. The attrition rate for pilots attempting this bordered on suicidal. What the RAF desperately needed was a way to close that lethal gap. Those final 600 yards where German gunners held every advantage. They needed to remain invisible whilst hunting. They needed impossibly to erase themselves from the sky. Jeffrey Pike wasn't mad precisely. He was simply operating on a different wavelength from everyone else at Combined Operations Headquarters, whilst other strategists discussed troop movements and naval bombardments. Pike would derail meetings with proposals to build aircraft carriers from ISOR-trained commandos to fight on roller skates. Lord Mountbatten tolerated him because roughly 1 idea in 10 turned out to be brilliant. The other 9 just made people uncomfortable. March 1942. Pike hunched over his desk in Richmond Terrace, scribbling calculations on whatever paper came to hand. Envelopes, meeting agendas, once memorably on the back of a classified shipping manifest. He'd been obsessing over the night fighter problem for weeks. Every conventional approach assumed the same baseline. Aircraft are dark objects that become visible against lighter backgrounds. What if you inverted that assumption? What if you made the aircraft match the background instead? The idea wasn't entirely original. Nature had figured it out millions of years ago. Certain deep-sea fish possess photoores, light-producing organs on their undersides that match the dim glow filtering down from the surface. Predators looking upward see no silhouette, just uniform luminance. The fish effectively disappears. Pike had read about this in a marine biology journal borrowed from the London Library. If evolution could manage it with modified cells, surely British engineering could replicate it with electric lamps. His memo landed on desks at the Air Ministry like a grenade. Proposal for elimination of aircraft silhouettes through forward illumination. The title alone prompted raised eyebrows. The content made people reach for aspirin, Pike argued that night fighters appeared as dark shapes because they blocked light from the sky behind them. Solution: mount high-intensity lamps on the aircraft's leading edges, nose, wing fronts, engine cowlings, calibrated to match the background luminance. The aircraft would glow just brightly enough to equal Thesky's natural brightness when viewed from ahead. No darker patch, no silhouette, optical invisibility. The objections came immediately. Wouldn't the lamps make the aircraft more visible, not less? Pike's response dripped with condescension. Only if one fails to grasp the principle of adaptive countershading, he explained patiently as though addressing slow children. Human eyes detect contrast, not absolute brightness. A black aircraft against a gray sky creates massive contrast, instantly visible. An aircraft glowing at precisely the same luminance as Thesky behind it, zero contrast, invisible. Someone pointed out that sky brightness varies constantly. Altitude, time of night, moon phase, cloud cover, every variable shifted the target luminance. Pike had anticipated this. The lamps would need variable intensity controls adjusted by the pilot based on conditions. Not elegant, but workable. Besides, rough adjustment would suffice. You didn't need perfect matching, just close enough to eliminate the sharp silhouette that enemy gunners relied upon. The Air Ministry remained skeptical. Resources were stretched impossibly thin. Every shilling spent on Pike's lighting scheme meant one less spent on radar development or aircraft production. Why gamble on an eccentrics theory when conventional? Solutions were showing promise? The new AI Make-8 radar could detect targets at 4 miles. Surely improving radar made more sense than mounting fairy lights on fighters. But Pike had an ally, Wing Commander Derek Jackson, an RAF officer who also happened to be a spectroscopist. Jackson understood photometry, luminance matching, and the physics of human vision. He ran Pike's calculations through properly and came back amazed. The theory was sound, not just plausible, actually sound. Jackson carried enough credibility to force a second look. By June 1942, Pike had secured limited funding for preliminary tests. Not much. Enough for a small team at the telecommunications research establishment to mock up a prototype system. The official project designation was Airborne Diffused Lighting. Pilots immediately dubbed it Pike's Folly. The name that eventually stuck came later, borrowed from an American vaudeville song about a character who possessed the power of invisibility. Yehudi lights as in, who's attacking us? Yehudi? You don't see him? The engineering team at T.R. Deford stared at their assignment with a mixture of fascination and bewilderment. They'd expected mirrors, some clever arrangement of reflective surfaces that would bounce skylight around the aircraft. Instead, Pike's specifications called for tungsten filament lamps, rheostats, and precise phototrick measurements. This wasn't camouflage in any traditional sense. This was active counter-illumination, and it violated every instinct trained into them about making aircraft less visible. Here's what made it so counterintuitive. For centuries, military camouflage had meant making things darker. Dull paint, dark colors, absorbing light rather than reflecting it. Night bombers were painted matte black for precisely this reason. The notion of making an aircraft brighter to hide it struck most people as barking mad. But the physics were irrefutable once you understood how human vision actually detects objects in low light conditions. The human eye doesn't see objects, it sees contrast. Your retina compares the brightness of adjacent areas and reports differences to your brain. A dark aircraft against a lighter sky creates a sharp, luminance gradient. That edge, that boundary between different brightness levels, is what your visual system latches onto. Remove the gradient and the boundary vanishes. The object effectively ceases to exist as far as your perception is concerned. The team needed to quantify exactly how bright the lamps should be. Too dim and the aircraft remained darker than the background, still visible. Too bright, and you'd create a glowing beacon that German gunners could spot from miles away. The answer lay in careful phototrick measurement. Using sensitive luminance meters, they measured sky brightness under various conditions. Clear night with quarter moon approximately 0.02 candelas per square meter. Overcast with ground glow from cities, 0.01 candelas. Bright moonlight as high as 0.1 candelas. The lamps themselves presented fascinating challenges. Standard aircraft navigation lights were far too bright, designed to be visible at several miles. What Pike needed were low-intensity sources that could be precisely dimmed. The engineers settled on modified landing lights with variable transformers. Each lamp would mount flush with the aircraft's skin on forward-facing surfaces, the nose cone, the leading edges of wings, the engine nacelles, and the propeller hubs. But here's where it got properly clever. The lights only worked when viewed from specific angles. Approach the aircraft from the side or rear, and you'd see the lamps as bright spots, actually making the aircraft more visible. The system only provided invisibility when the enemy gunner looked directly at the approaching fighter, which fortunately was exactly the scenario that mattered. German rear gunners scanning behind and below their bomber would look straight into the forward-facing lamps, which from their perspective would perfectly match Thesky luminance behind the fighter. October 1942 brought the first bench tests. Engineers mounted a lamp array on a movable platform in a darkened hangar whilst observers positioned themselves at measured distances. The lamps were energized and adjusted. At 30 candelas per square meter, far too bright, the platform glowed like a small constellation. Dial it down to 10 candelas, still obviously visible. Down further at 0.05 candelas, something remarkable happened. One observer reported the platform had simply stopped being there. The edge detection that normally outlined objects had failed. The brain, receiving no contrast signal, filled in the space with uniform sky tone. They moved the tests outdoors on moonless nights. A Wellington bomber, obsolete as a frontline aircraft but perfect for experimental work, sat on the airfield whilst technicians fitted lamp assemblies. Observers walked towards it from 500 YD in darkness, without lamps clearly visible at 300 YD as a darker mass with lamps properly adjusted. Nothing. Even at 100 yards, observers reported they couldn't determine where the aircraft began and the sky ended. The Wellington lumbered Downford's runway on the evening of 15th of November 1942, its Pegasus engines straining against the additional weight of experimental equipment. Flight Lieutenant Peter Olver sat in the right-hand seat, deeply unconvinced that bolting lamps to an aircraft would achieve anything except making it an easier target. In the rear position, Squadron Leader Harold Button operated the rheostat controls, ready to adjust lamp intensity based on Olver's instructions. The test protocol was straightforward. Climb to 8,000 FT, fly a straight course, whilst a chase aircraft approached from various angles and distances. The chase crew would report visibility ranges. Simple enough, except everyone involved expected the Wellington to glow like a Christmas tree the moment those lamps energized. Button flicked the first switch. 6 lamps on the nose assembly came alive, each producing roughly 0.03 candelas per square meter. Olver braced himself, expecting blinding glare to flood the cockpit. Instead, nothing changed. The lamps were so carefully calibrated and directed forward that even from the pilot's seat mere feet away, they produced no noticeable illumination inside the aircraft. All their output projected ahead and slightly outward into the observer's line of sight. The radio crackled. The chase-bow fighter was positioning at 3,000 dwarweds astern, slightly below. Perfect firing position for a German bomber's defensive gunner. The pilot's voice came through. Beginning approach now. Cannot see you yet. Stand by. 30 seconds passed. 2,000 OWARs. Still negative visual contact. Your navigation lights are off. Correct. Olver confirmed. Everything except the experimental lamps was dark. Sat 500 bauded. This is extraordinary. I should be seeing your silhouette by now. 1,000 baud though. Still nothing. The Beaufighter pilot sounded genuinely unsettled. At this range, on a normal night, Even with minimal moonlight, a Wellington would be clearly visible, a darker patch blocking stars, a recognizable shape. But the forward-facing lamps were bleeding just enough photons into the observer's retina to precisely match the background luminance. No contrast, no detection. At 800 yards, the bow fighter pilot finally reported, "I've got something very faint. Could be you, could be my imagination." At 600 YD confirmed visual. "I can make out your shape now, but only just. If I weren't specifically looking for you, I'd miss you entirely." In combat, that translated to a German gunner having perhaps 2 seconds to react instead of the usual 15 or 20. Utterly inadequate time to traverse a gun, aim, and open fire. They ran the test 17 times that night under varying conditions. Each approach confirmed the same result. Detection range collapsed from the normal 2000 YD to somewhere between 600 and 800 wide. The lamps didn't make the Wellington completely invisible. Physics wouldn't allow that, but they reduced its visible signature by roughly 70%. That margin meant life or death. The skeptics started converting. Wing Commander Jackson flew as an observer on the third night of trials. He'd believed the theory, but needed to see the practical application. After watching a Wellington literally fade from view at 1500 wide, he returned to Earth pale and shaken. "It works," he told the assembled engineers. "It actually bloody works. We need this on operational aircraft immediately." Technical challenges remained. The lamp assemblies added 90 lb of weight, insignificant for most aircraft, but still requiring careful balance calculations. Electrical systems needed modification to handle the additional load. Most critically, pilots needed training in how to adjust intensity. Set the lamps too bright for conditions, and you'd achieve the opposite of invisibility. Too dim, and the effect disappeared. It required judgment, practice, and a feel for ambient light levels. Engineers began designing production units, simplified controls, ruggedized housings, installation procedures that wouldn't require dismantling half the aircraft. By January 1943, they had a system ready for operational trials. The question now, which squadrons would receive this bizarre new weapon first? Coastal Command got there first, which surprised precisely no one who understood the politics of scarce resources. Fighter Command wanted Yehuda lights for night intruders, but Bomber Command claimed priority for Pathfinder aircraft. Whilst they bickered, Air Marshal John Slezer at Coastal Command quietly secured the initial production run. His reasoning was impeccable. U-Boat were slaughtering Atlantic convoys, and maritime patrol aircraft desperately needed any edge that would let them close on surface submarines before lookouts spotted them. June 1943, Visor's Wellington Mk. Thieves aircraft from 172 Squadron at Chivener received the first operational installations. These weren't the glamorous night fighters that captured public imagination. They were workhorses fitted with ASV Mecha third radar, depth charges, and now Pike's lighting system. The tactical problem they faced mirrored the night fighter dilemma exactly. Approaches surfaced from too far out, and lookouts would spot you in time for an emergency dive. The submarine would vanish beneath the waves. Depth charges would bracket empty water, and another convoy ship would die tomorrow. The standard approach altitude was 4,000 left. At that height, on a moonlit night, a patrolling Wellington became visible to sharp-eyed lookouts at roughly 2 mi. The submarine needed only 30 seconds to dive. Hatch clangs shut, ballast tanks flood, boat angles down. By the time the Wellington reached attack position, it would be dropping depth charges on a target already 50 FT under, near useless. With Yehudi lights properly calibrated, that detection range collapsed. Flight Lieutenant Marcus Campbell achieved the first confirmed kill using the system on 3 July 1943, attacking U-607 northwest of Cape Finisterre. His after-action report noted maintained 4200 FT during approach. Lamps adjusted to intensity setting 4. Visual acquisition of surface submarine at 1.2 meters. Observed no reaction from conning tower lookouts until weapons release at 400 YD. 6 depth charges straddled target. Submarine broke up with violent explosion. Post-war records confirmed U-607 went down with all hands. Her lookouts never having transmitted a warning that an aircraft was inbound. The mathematics were brutal from the German perspective. reducing detection range from 2 MEI to half a mile, cut reaction time from 90 seconds to roughly 20, insufficient for a safe dive. U-boat crews began reporting ghost aircraft that appeared without warning from the darkness. Morale in the submarine service, already strained, took another hit. By August 1943, installations had expanded to Lee-Light Wellingtons, aircraft that carried powerful searchlights for illuminating submarines during the final attack run. The combination proved devastating. Approach invisibly using Yehudi lights, then at 600 yards, flip on the light and blind the lookouts whilst simultaneously illuminating the target for the bombardier. U-boat kills per sortie increased by 47% for equipped squadrons. Fighter Command finally secured their allocation in September. Number 23, Squadron at Little Snoring received modified Mosquito Mk2s fitted with the lighting system. Their mission night intruder operations over occupied France. The tactic was exquisitely simple. Orbit known Luftwaffe night fighter bases at dusk and dawn, catching German aircraft during takeoff or landing. Vulnerable moments when pilots concentrated on flying rather than watching for threats. The Mosquitoes would lurk at 8,000 RFR pilots adjusting lamp intensity to match the twilight conditions. German fighters would lift off, navigation lights blazing during the vulnerable climb-out phase. The Mosquito would dive close to 400 YD, invisible against the darkening sky, and open fire with 420mm cannons. By the time ground observers realized an attack was happening, a Bf-110 or J-88 would be cartwheeling into the trees in flames. Number 515 Squadron at Bircham Newton received installations in October for anti-shipping strikes. Number 456 Squadron Ray AF at Valley got theirs in November for maritime patrol. Slowly, quietly, Yehudi lights spread through squadrons where the tactical advantage justified the installation complexity. Flight Lieutenant David Williams brought his Mosquito around for the third time, orbiting the German transport route at 9,000 AF below. A Junkers Do-52 droned westward. Things applies to units in Normandy. Standard procedure dictated Williams should attack from astern and above, the transport's blind spot. But tonight he wanted to test something. He adjusted his Yehudi lamp intensity to setting 6, matching the ambient glow of twilight at this altitude, and positioned himself directly ahead of the Ju-52. Head-on approach, absolutely suicidal by conventional doctrine. The front gunner would see him coming from a mile away. He closed from 2,000 YD. Liners flew straight and level. No evasive action. 500 YD, still no reaction. Williams could see the cockpit clearly now. 2 pilots visible in the greenhouse canopy. They weren't looking at him. They were looking through him, their eyes registering nothing but uniform sky tone where a Mosquito should be screaming towards them, 1,000 yards. The front gunner, positioned in the glazed nose, should be hammering away by now. Nothing. Williams felt sweat trickling despite the cold. This was insane. He was flying directly at them. At 600 yards, he squeezed the firing button. 4 Hispano cannons erupted. 20mm shells walking up the Weiner's fuselage. The transport staggered, rolled left, and began its death dive. Williams passed overhead close enough to see the front gunner frantically traversing his MG-15, finally aware he was under attack. 3 seconds too late. Combat reports from late 1943 and early 1944 told the same story repeatedly. Equipped aircraft were closing to what crews called knife-fighting range without drawing defensive fire. Squadron leader James Wheeler from 515 Squadron recorded 11 attacks on German coastal convoys between October and December 1943. In every engagement, his Beaufighter received no defensive fire until after his first burst struck home. His after-action summaries grew almost monotonous. Approached from 270 dig relative, no reaction observed until weapons release. Target engaged at 500 YD. The statistics bore out what individual reports suggested. Squadrons equipped with Yehudi lights showed a 73% increase in successful attacks compared to their pre-installation baseline. More tellingly, combat losses dropped by 41%. Fewer German gunners getting first shot meant fewer RAF crews going into the channel. German intelligence pieced together fragments of information but struggled to understand what they were facing. Luftwaffe pilot debriefs mentioned Gister Flugzeug ghost aircraft that appeared without warning. U-boat lookouts reported similar phenomena. One surviving report from U-boat Command, dated March 1944, noted, Recurring reports from returning boats describe aircraft materializing at close range without prior visual detection. Lookouts report clear visibility conditions and proper scanning procedures, recommend investigation of possible British technological countermeasure. They investigated, of course, captured RAF aircrew, were interrogated about new detection avoidance systems. None knew enough technical details to explain properly. The few who understood the principle tried describing it. Lamps in the nose, sir, matched to sky brightness. German intelligence officers filed these reports alongside claims of death rays and jet-powered bombers. The desperate fantasies of broken men saying anything to make interrogation stop. The truth was simultaneously simpler and more sophisticated than they imagined. No exotic technology, no revolutionary physics, just careful photometry and an understanding of how human vision processes contrast. Pike had weaponized a principle that deep-sea fish had been using since the Cambrian period. By February 1944, over 200 aircraft across Coastal Command, Fighter Command, and specialist units carried Yehudi installations. Maintenance crews could install a complete system in roughly 18 hours. Pilots learned intensity adjustment procedures during standard checkout flights. The system had transitioned from experimental curiosity to operational weapon with remarkable speed. Yet even as it proved its worth in combat, Yehudi lights were already becoming obsolete. Technology was advancing along parallel tracks, and one particular development was about to render optical camouflage almost irrelevant. The telecommunications research establishment at Malvern had been working miracles with magnetrons, whilst Pike fiddled with lamps. By autumn 1943, centimetric radar operating at 10 cm and later 3 cm wavelengths began rolling off production lines. The AI-MKX radar set fitted to Mosquito night fighters could detect a bomber at 8 mi and maintain lockdown to 400 FT. Suddenly, closing that final visual gap mattered far less. You didn't need to see the enemy anymore. The radar would guide you to gun range regardless of ambient light, sky conditions, or how well the target had been camouflaged. Fighter command pilots noticed the shift immediately. The new radar sets were so reliable that crews developed tactics entirely divorced from visual acquisition. You'd follow the blip on your scope close to 800 YD based purely on range data and only then look up to confirm your target before firing. The Yehudi lights still worked brilliantly. German gunners still failed to spot approaching fighters, but the advantage had become redundant. You were already inside their reaction envelope before visual detection mattered. Coastal Command experienced the same transition. ASV Mk6 radar could spot a submarine's conning tower at 6 miles in moderate sea states. U-boat diving to avoid aircraft were now reacting to radar detection, not visual spotting. Whether the attacking Wellington glowed or remained dark made little difference when the submarine was already submerging, based on radar warning receivers detecting your emissions from beyond visual range. By June 1944, production of Yehudi light installations had quietly ceased. Existing systems remained operational. No point removing equipment that still functioned, but new aircraft received radar upgrades instead. The Air Ministry's allocation priorities shifted entirely towards electronic warfare. Engineers who'd spent months perfecting lamp assemblies found themselves reassigned to radar countermeasure projects. Jeffrey Pike never saw his invention fade into obscurity. He'd already moved on to his next obsession, Habachok, the proposed aircraft carrier constructed from pyrite, a mixture of ice and wood pulp. That project consumed him through 1943 and early 1944 before being canceled as impractical. His mental health, always fragile, deteriorated steadily. On 21 February 1948, Pike was found dead in his London flat, an overdose of barbiturates beside him. The coroner recorded suicide. He was 54. The Yehudi Light program disappeared into classified files and stayed there for decades. Post-war aviation histories mentioned radar advances extensively, but said nothing about optical camouflage. Partly this was standard security classification. Even obsolete technology remained secret in case future applications emerged. Partly it was simple historical oversight. Radar made for dramatic storytelling. The boffins who won the war with electronic wizardry. Lamps mounted on aircraft noses. Less compelling, apparently. Yet, Pike's fundamental insight that you could make an object invisible by actively controlling how it emits or reflects radiation planted seeds that would bloom decades later. Modern stealth aircraft like the F-117 and B-2 use precisely the same principle, just applied to radar instead of visible light. Their shapes and coatings control radar reflection to minimize detection. Active cancellation systems on some naval vessels emit sound waves to cancel their acoustic signature. Military research programs investigate adaptive camouflage systems, where surface panels adjust brightness and color to match surroundings. The U.S. Navy experimented with Yehudi lights on TBM Avenger torpedo bombers in 1945, designating it Project Yehudi. Results mirrored British findings, dramatic reduction in visual detection range. But by then, American night fighters carried superb radar. The system saw no operational deployment. Canadian and Australian forces reviewed the technology post-war, but concluded radar had made it obsolete before it could mature. Today, buried in declassified Air Ministry files at the National Archives in Kew, technical reports gather dust. Lamp specifications, installation diagrams, combat effectiveness analyses showing 73% improvement in attack success rates. Jeffrey Pike's name appears occasionally in footnotes, usually alongside Habachokor, his earlier escape from a German prison camp in 1915. The mirror trick that made night fighters invisible, forgotten by everyone except a handful of aviation historians who stumble across those archived reports and think, bloody hell, that actually worked.